Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This episode was actually inspired by a conversation I was having with our Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Sabri Blumberg. And now many of you know Sabri. She's been on several episodes of Dental Business RX, specifically episodes 2, 5, and 6. And Sabri, if you're an MGE client, you definitely know Sabri. And Sabri is in charge of all of MGE's technical delivery and has worked with thousands of doctors. Anyway, we were discussing business trends in the industry right now. You know, things like larger practices bringing in specialists or running the multiple practice model with smaller offices and corporate dentistry. And she said something I felt that was pretty profound, and it defined one of the larger problems that dentists in private practice are facing today. And essentially what she said was that in the past, dentists used to be very focused on collections. But now that focus has to turn to profit. And what's happened is margins used to be a lot more forgiving in the dental industry, and they've been dwindling as the years have been going on, and we've hit a point of almost critical mass. And the subject of profitability is now becoming a real issue if you don't watch what you're doing. And that's what we're dedicating this episode of Dental Business RX to, specifically how to manage and maximize profitability in this post-pandemic environment. I'm Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host, and we'll be joined momentarily by Sabri, so you can hear her discuss it from her viewpoint. This will be a bit of a conversational episode because we both have different viewpoints on this subject. And the idea is to give you things to increase your profitability, how to evaluate specific decisions you make with your practice, and changes that you should be looking at doing in order to ensure that your practice is profitable. All right, so let's start off. Paint a picture for me. So we're having this conversation, and you bring up this statement. Dentists used to be very focused on collections, and they still are to a degree. And now that focus has to shift to profitability.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I've noticed it in the last, specifically like 9 months or so, speaking to clients. Mm-hmm. And I don't even know if they noticed what they were concerned about. But what struck me as odd, I speak to a lot of the newer clients, as well as established clients, obviously. But with the younger clients coming in, the first thing I usually do is I just get a little bit of a feel for what they have going on so that we can kind of properly figure out their path on what needs to be implemented and things like that to get them to their goals. And the people that I see coming in, our younger clients that I'm interviewing, are different than they used to be. It's shifting.
Okay.
Where, you always have your smaller practices that want to get bigger. And then you have a few very ambitious doctors that are doing great that want multiple practices. You always have that. But that the younger clients usually were doing 60, 70, something like that, and wanted to get to 100, 150. And that kind of was the stable the stable thing that I saw as like a normal.
So someone come in doing 60, 70 a month, and they want to get up to 100, 150.
Yeah, that's pretty normal.
Okay.
Right? And then the guys doing 150 or so were usually the guys that wanted multiple practices and built this empire. Just this very, different kind of ambitious doctor, right? But what I didn't see a lot of is the guys that were already doing 100 and 150 that weren't particularly ambitious, right? They weren't looking for, give me 5, 10 practices.
Sure.
Right. But they needed to grow.
They needed to grow.
So
who decided they needed to grow? They did? Or
they decided they needed to grow because they're not making enough money at 100 and 150. And where even if we go back 3-5 years ago, if I had a new client that was unaware of what the word profit even meant, like they totally didn't know how to figure out their overhead, they had no idea what profit was, and they were just managing their business by their collections. At 100 and 150, you could be really one of the worst managers on planet Earth in dentistry and make money.
Okay. Interesting.
Not today. today you're doing 100 and 150 and you don't have certain checkpoints in place, you're not making money. And the solution very often in the client's mind is they have to grow.
So I need to make more money because I'm not making enough money at 150. So the solution is make more money.
Correct. Not thinking with it's not the amount of money I'm making, it's my profitability.
Right.
And that's where, and so I started having very different conversations.
Okay.
With clients, not just focused around growth, but focused around running their business properly so that they're making money at the levels that they are at. Because you can just keep throwing money at it and grow.
Right.
Right. And you still don't have any money because we didn't fix the underlying problem.
Right. So essentially what you're looking at here, and I guess we both talked about this. We talked about this before the episode, folks.
Yeah.
But essentially, so let's say 10 years ago, the doctor doing that 10 years ago is equivalent of 150, which is probably like 125 or 110 or whatever.
Even 5 years ago.
Right. Let's say 5 years ago doing 150, you're making money. It's fine because your margins are pretty safe. Like what you're spending on labor, what you're spending on materials, what you're spending on advertising. It's not going to eat up whatever profitability you might have if you're doing those kinds of revenues.
Correct. You make a good living.
Right.
Yeah.
So now that has changed drastically because those margins have been slowly but surely and even more accelerated in the last year or so been severely eaten up.
Correct. Compounded with a lot of dentists, a lot of our newer clients are very heavily into PPOs.
Right.
Right. And PPOs, in a response to what's been going on, have been lowering their fees, which I personally can't figure out. But that's their response to what's going on. And
I heard one client, sorry to interrupt. I was giving the finance seminar yesterday, and I heard one client, this client is a great guy.
Yeah.
But he gave me a rendition of what occurred.
Oh.
Like apparently it started with Delta.
Yes.
Okay. And they tried to get a 10% cut in fee reductions and that didn't fly.
Yes.
So then they got an 8.8 and they used that as a bit of an advertising tool to the employers. Like, look how we're saving money. Of course, right. By, keeping the doctors making less money.
Correct.
But then that set a precedent. So then other companies have followed suit.
Yeah.
Blue Cross Blue Shield.
MedLife is usually a quick second. Yeah. Right after Delta.
Yeah. And I've talked about this a lot, the whole inflation issue and the labor cost issue and now this insurance issue. It's still I marvel at it. So
right.
So you have to interrupt.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So you have this really weird climate where you have things getting more expensive.
Right.
But what you're getting paid for your services, if you're sitting in PPO still, is going down. And so that profit margin that already wasn't great is shrinking.
Right.
Right. To the point where they feel they're not taking home enough money or less than they used to. Right. And the problem is that it takes a certain amount of money to run a dental practice.
Right.
Right. If I add more patients, I need to add more personnel. I need to add more supplies. I need to add more labs. So the overhead goes up right along with your production.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily increasing the numbers doesn't necessarily handle the profitability problem.
Well, especially if those numbers are inadequate numbers in the first place.
Correct.
It's same amount of time and effort to do a crown for $800 that it takes to do it for $1,400.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same crown.
Exactly.
It's just a different insurance reimbursement.
Exactly. Anyway, so that's kind of what spurred all of this in my mind. It's like I'm having very different conversations.
Interesting.
Than I used to have.
Interesting. So that the margin evaporating.
Yes.
Has now started to spur people to look at I need to do something about this. Maybe the solution isn't ideal.
Right. Or I need to do something at this at a different level.
Right.
Where they used to look at that like 50, 60, 70 a month. They're now looking at 100, 120, 150 a month. Right. Which used to be the number that people would aspire to reach.
Sure. Right. No, that makes sense.
As a generalization.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so with this in mind, right, we've got this new environment now.
Yeah.
We have the, margins being eaten up. We've talked about at length getting out of PPOs.
Yes.
We've talked about inflation. We've talked about how all these costs have gone up, lab costs. I just talked to a lab the other day where their fees just went up by 14%.
That's right.
So this is what's happening.
This is what's happening. And simply because we can't predict whether inflation is going to continue or stall, or we don't know, right, what's going to happen a year from now. I don't have a crystal ball and I hope everything's fine and probably will be.
Right.
Right. But you do need to make some changes now in the way that you manage your business regardless.
And, I don't want to go off track, right?
Yeah.
Which I know you and I have it. I mean, Sabri and I used to live stream 2 hours a day at the height of the pandemic for we did this for months.
Yeah. And
so we're
2
used to
hours
just
went
talking.
pretty quick.
It went pretty quick.
Yeah.
But I don't want to forget about this because this is actually something I wanted to mention just on this inflation issue.
Yes.
Right. And then we'll get into, what you do about this situation with profitability. But all right, so the inflation numbers, because I did an inflation episode, I don't know when it was a few months ago.
Yeah.
But okay, so the numbers in January came in, right? Or February. Yeah, January numbers were 7.5% year over year.
Yeah.
Meaning something that cost you $1 in January of 2021 cost you $1.07.5 in 2022. Right. And obviously that's situational. Certain things cost more than others. Gas costs more than 7.5% more. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So these inflation numbers are going up. Right.
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about this recently because, we've talked to a lot of clients about raising their fees.
Yes.
They have to raise their fees, right?
Yes.
Get out of PPOs, but you have to raise your fees.
Yeah.
And so I've surveyed at some seminars, especially with newer clients, and not as many as I'd hoped. 45% have definitely raised their fees. Others are in the process of it or whatever. Yeah. But it's not as many as it should have been. It's not as quick as it should have been.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess some of the concern I've run into with some folks I've talked to about this is well, what if I raise my fees and then inflation stops? Right?
So?
Well, but here's the thing. Let's say a Coke is $1.
Yeah.
Now. I remember when it used to be 20 cents.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway. No, 25.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's somebody listening. I remember when it was a nickel. I don't.
Whatever.
Anyway, whatever, right? And that's fine. More power to you. All right. So what happens if, this Coke is $1?
Yeah.
And then it goes up to $1.25.
Yeah.
Because inflation, right?
Sure.
And then all of a sudden inflation starts to cool off. It's at 2%, 1.8%, or, non-existent, right?
Sure, but I seriously doubt those prices are going to come down.
That's the point. I don't see then all of a sudden, because inflation has dropped into a manageable number, that all of a sudden Coke's going to be $1.25. It goes back to $1. It's going to stay at $1.25.
Correct. And your employees are not going to say, oh, give me less money now.
Right.
With
that. Inflation stopped. I don't want $18 an hour anymore. I'll go back to 16.
Right.
Right. That's not going to happen. If the prices have gone up, they're going to stay up.
Right.
So if you have not done a fee increase in the face of all this, you absolutely have to.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And we started recommending that well over a year ago.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right. So we've got this new focus. You're hearing things that you're not hearing before.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what brought it to what brought it to my attention.
Right. So now let's take a look at how do we sort that out? So here I am. I'm a newer client. I come to you and I go, okay, listen, I want to, I need to make more money. Right. So my solution is to produce more, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with growing and producing more. Right.
No. And I want them to.
Right. But now, how do I do that in a way where I make sure, because our margins are a lot different now than they used to be?
Sure.
How do I do that in a way where I make sure that I maximize my profitability as I'm doing it?
Okay. So I think the first thing that I recommend, there's 4 things that I go over with them, and they're really simple things. It's almost like these are Band-Aids, but they do the job.
Okay. So why don't you hit me with the 4?
So the first thing is really figuring out what your overhead is.
Okay.
Right? A person has to know, a business owner has to know what their overhead is. Mm-hmm. And they have to know exactly how much should I be spending on personnel? How much should I be spending on marketing? How much should I be spending on labs and supplies? So that's the first thing. It's like, how much does it cost to run your business? Now, your overhead is not your P&L, mm-hmm. right? Your P&L that you get basically just says how much money you spend.
Right. It's like forensic.
Right? That's exactly right. And, you being my husband know that how much money I spend in a month has nothing to do with how much money we have to spend to keep the household running.
That's true.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So how much money you're spending versus how much should you be spending are 2 entirely different things.
Sure.
So your overhead basically being a breakdown on what expenses do you have and what should you be spending money on. And a lot of guys that I see, you need to market. Mm-hmm. But they considered there's not enough money in their budget for marketing. I guess budget. That's the best way to say overhead. You need a budget.
Well, but they also have to have an idea. And to that end, right, like one of the first things I know we have a client do is complete our overhead sheet, which is pretty intensely long.
Yes.
Right? And just to give you an idea, well, you know this, but mm-hmm. for the listeners, the reason we created this overhead sheet was we would this was years ago when we mm-hmm. did this, and we've updated it since, although I'll tell you a funny story about it in a second. We created this years ago because we would ask a client, what's your overhead? Oh, $40 a month. Then we'd actually sit down and figure it out, and it was really 50.
Yeah.
Because they were misestimating their payroll. They weren't considering semi-annual expenses, things they're paying twice a year, like liability or workers' comp, or something like this. There were expenses missing.
Yes.
So we have this really thorough, complete overhead and expense worksheet. We have it digital and we have it analog.
Yeah.
And what we can do, if for anybody listening, if you want to download a copy, if you go to the episode webpage, there's a link. I'm going to have the link on the episode webpage where you can click and download a copy of the overhead sheet if you want to work on this for your practice.
Okay.
The funny aspect of the overhead sheet I just mentioned was you'll notice one of the points on there under telecom is pager service, which Sabri has been lobbying for me to take off. Don't think I will. I'll leave it on there. Still have that picture of me in jorts with a pager on from the 90s, so never mind. Anyway, sorry, but go ahead. You're talking about overhead.
Right. So you need to know what your overhead is. Mm-hmm. If you're going to spend beyond your overhead, like if you're going to buy something that you don't have budgeted for,
okay,
you need to look at that before you spend it to make sure that you have the money to do that, right? So the first thing you need to know is what's part of my overhead, what's discretionary spending. And then you need to know when you have discretionary spending, exactly where am I at collections wise? Do I have the money to spend on this?
Right.
And it's usually little expenses. It's not the big expense that's going to kill you at the end of the month. It's the $100 here, the $200 there. They're like, oh yeah, buy this. Oh, that's not a big deal. That when you add it all up, that's where all your profit went.
Got it.
So the other thing is your staff needs to have an idea of how much money your business, your dental practice needs to make.
So you're saying the staff. So let's say I know my overhead.
Yes.
It's $50 a month. Let's say. And that overhead, just as an aside, should include paying the doctor what the doctor needs to survive as well.
Correct.
And when you're going to create bonuses and things like this, you would use this as a basis.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So I know what my overhead is. It's $50 a month.
Yeah.
So my staff should know what my overhead is. Would I tell them look, to run this place, it costs $50 a month, or would I tell them it's a little more?
Well, you should include reserves and things like that, right?
Okay, so I'm not going to go and say it's $50,000, but I want to save money. Let's do 60.
Correct. You need to make sure that you took into consideration your taxes and things like that, right? So when you tell the staff this, you better have a clear idea how much it actually costs to run your business and make sure that your business is financially secure.
Right. And if I can just speak to that for a second, if you don't mind, because I'm in the process, I'm right in the middle of financial planning and profitability seminar.
Okay.
Well, not right now, I'm doing the podcast, but I was doing it yesterday. Because tomorrow we're going over bonus plans.
Okay, there you go.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So when we go over calculating overhead, which we do in this seminar very in detail, one of the points we bring up is this is also going to be the basis for any type of a bonus plan you might launch.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So if you, and this was the point that brought up, you could have the coolest staff ever assembled.
Yes.
The best staff ever assembled. Okay. But if you put them all together, and you say, okay, cool. Look, the office did, let's say your overhead's 100 and the office did 150 this month. And please don't do this. I'm telling you, don't do this. But you could, if you really are, what's the word? Masochistic, right? You could do this, hurt yourself. Have a staff meeting. You did 150 and your overhead's 100 and say, okay, everybody, we did 150. So we have an extra $50,000.
Yeah.
What do you think I should do with it?
Yeah, I don't think that's what I'm recommending.
No, because they could be the coolest staff in the world.
It doesn't matter.
And it would be, well, we need a new Cavitron. We need to do this. And, the cone beam's been acting up. And we need, branded toothbrushes. And we need this marketing. We need this. We need that. Yeah. They're going to try and do something with that money.
Right.
Right? They're not necessarily in the position where they're directing the office's money and knowing what the long-term prospects for the office are.
Correct, because part of the money that you are making, you might reserve for expansion, to buy another.
Retire debt.
Yeah, retire debt, buy another practice, put another operatory in, right? And this is all money that you need so that you don't have to take on these crazy loans when the time comes. But the point that we're talking about here is sharing your overhead with your staff. And then just to be crystal clear, I don't mean go give your overhead sheet that you fill out to your staff.
Wait, you're making that much money?
Right.
What? Yeah.
What I'm talking about is if your overhead, in order for you to do everything that you want to do with this business and reserve the money and reserve money for expansion and things like that and pay your taxes and pay yourself, which is part of the joys of ownership, if
Sure.
you get to do these things, that if in order to do that, you need $100,000 a month, and you're consistently collecting 95, your staff needs to know, listen, guys, in order for us to do what we want to do with this business and pay you and pay bonuses, right? And bring in lunches and play games and do these things and pay the overhead, we're going to have to do 100. So the 100 is the minimum number. And that's what I mean. Your staff needs to know what minimum number they need to meet every month in order for this business to be stable.
Right.
Right? Because I mean, I just saw it a few weeks ago where I'm talking to a client and they're consistently doing 5-10 G's under the overhead every month.
So they're making 5,000 to 10,000 less than their monthly overhead.
Correct. So I asked him, I said, does your staff know how much you need to make in order, because he could survive. He just was taking less of a paycheck, which means that he couldn't fund his personal retirement.
I see.
Right. So he wasn't going broke per se, but this is, I mean, he would be making more money working for a chain.
Got it.
Right. And that's not why you own your own business. So I asked him, does your staff even know? And he's like, no, they have no idea. And I'm like, you need to let them know.
Right.
They would push a little bit more. They would go the extra mile. They would think, because otherwise they're patting themselves on the back going, we're doing almost 100 a month. That's great.
Yeah, but doesn't pay the bills.
Doesn't pay the bills. And they don't know that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And you know what? 5 years ago, 100 a month was great.
Yeah.
And this practice is only 6 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I guess if we were to sort of summarize it, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, you got to know what your overhead is.
Absolutely.
Now, if you're gonna explain your overhead to the team, again, remember, even the coolest group of staff would not be the people I put in charge of my money. This is not to say there's anything deficient with those staff members.
Of course not.
It's just the nature of the way this works.
Yeah.
Right. So I've established that my actual overhead, let's say, is 80.
Yeah.
Okay. Then for bonus purposes or other purposes, this is going to make sure that I have a little bit of a cushion in case, we have shut down or something like this, right? And if I need to pay off debt and things like this, I would probably start bonuses and I would be pushing for everybody to do 100.
Yes.
And that's where I'd start looking at bonusing people and things like this.
Absolutely. And obviously, if this isn't an issue, right, there's no need to bring it up with your staff at all. But if it is an issue, right, and you're producing close to overhead, you should definitely inform them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fact of life.
Yeah, it is.
You don't have to get into the specific numerical details, but
No,
the
you
team
don't.
should know generally what the demand for the office is.
That's right.
Okay, good. So that's overhead. And again, the link, if you want to download the MGE overhead sheet, you can go ahead and just go to the episode webpage, click the link, and you can download it. If you want help with this, you can always email us.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so you said there were 4 things. What's number 2?
Yeah, the second one, and I'll try to do this quicker than I did the last one.
No, we say practice success in 30 minutes or less.
And not when
unless
I'm
you
on.
and me are on the show. Okay. Practice success in hours. Okay. It won't be that long. Go ahead.
All right. Second thing is your fees. Obviously, your fees dictate how much money you're going to be making.
Okay.
Right. So we started recommending a year ago. What did we recommend? 10% increases. Yeah. Right. So you have to increase your fees. And you know what I find, Jeff? I find that when I say there's very few dentists I talk to where their private fee is even normal in the area.
You mean like it's in the low end?
It's on the low end.
I'm finding also that some people don't even understand this whole concept. And now look, and if they've heard this before, you may have heard this before, you may not have, but if you've been practicing for at least 10 years, you heard about this. But there's things like the Wasserman Guide and other books. You get the Wasserman Guide. They do Wasserman Medical and Wasserman Dental.
Yeah.
But generally, they do a fee survey across the U.S. because, we've all heard about, usual and customary fees or whatever, right, from the insurance companies. What the Wasserman Guide does is it establishes by zip code what percentile your fee for a specific procedure is in.
Yeah.
And by percentile, meaning what percentage of dentists in your area charge less than this, if I'm not mistaken,
that's
right?
Correct.
Yeah. So if you're in the 30th percentile, that means 70% charge more.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and they start at the 30th percentile.
Yes.
And they go up to the 90th percentile.
Correct.
And so you can take a procedure code, for a prophy, and you look in there, adult prophy, and there it is, 30 percentile, 40, and you can see where your fees sit. I know you and I tend to like to be in the 60th to 70th percentile.
That's right.
But so you're finding for that was the primer for those that don't know about this. And
Yes.
I found this recently. I'm like, yeah, the Wasserman Guide, or you find one of these percentile things. And I got this look like, what is that?
Right.
This is happening to me more and more as the years go by. Like I'll ask, like, you remember so-and-so? And I'll get these like younger people in the audience going, what?
Yeah. But I don't think it's just that we've been doing it a long time. I think we're paying attention to things we spoke about very little 10 years ago.
That's right. It was never that big of an issue.
It was never that big of an issue because the overriding factor always was, doesn't matter because they're making money.
Right.
Well, unless they were horrifically low.
Right. And obviously the idea is to increase your collections and grow.
Yes,
yeah, of course. Right. But as Sabri says, you don't want that to be you're now working 6 days a week because your margins are so low in order to have a lifestyle, which is then no longer a lifestyle.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But,
and you want to make sure that that you can at least control how much money you make, like your profit margin. So as you grow, it's really fun.
Right.
Because you're making more money. That's one of the rewards of owning your business.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's if business ownership was easy and getting a dental degree was easy, everybody would have a dental practice.
That's true.
But there's only 250,000 dentists in the United States?
A little over 200,000, including specialists, instructors.
Okay, well, it's less than I thought. So it tells you right there that there's not that many people that went through all the hardship
right
in order to get a dental license and then open their own business. So
not all of those own practices.
Right. So you might as well. So there's a reward that comes along with the suffering.
Right.
Right. So if you run your business so poorly that there's no profit, the reward is good. Like that's part of the reward. It's not the only reward, but it's definitely part of the reward is gone. Then, then why did you go through all that trouble?
Right. And so where you started with this, sorry, before I knocked you off track, which I have a tendency to do, was you were bringing up that you have clients you're talking to with their full fee, newer clients.
Yeah.
That isn't even in the low end of the percentile, not their insurance fee.
Yeah.
But their full fee.
Right. Right. So I think doing some research on what your fees in your area should be is one of them. If I owned a dental practice, I would have increased my fees at least 10% by now from when this COVID stuff started.
Right, especially when everybody opened back up.
Exactly. And then the problem becomes if you are stuck in PPO plans, you can't raise your fees because they're lowering yours.
Yeah, that's not your call.
No. That's no longer your call. So then, something that may have been a dream of yours to get out of PPOs may become a necessity at this point. Right? Like the dream may materialize.
My dream is
faster.
now a necessity. That's kind of funny.
It's true. So getting out of PPOs is a lot easier than you think it is. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like they have brainwashed dentists to the point where they think their entire business is going to disappear.
Right.
And all their patients are going to run away if we take their PPOs away from them.
Right.
Right. It's not going to happen. It's easy getting out of PPOs. It takes a little bit of courage and a little bit of know-how, but we can help you.
Well, do you mind if I invite anybody who wants to figure out a way to get out of PPOs?
Yeah.
Right. Could they email you?
They can email me.
All right. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I'll put Sabri's email on the episode webpage. But if you want to email Sabri, I'll tell you now. It's Sabri, Sabrib, B as in boy, at mgeonline.com.
Yeah. And then the only thing I'm going to say is, getting out of PPOs is situational, meaning the plan I give you is dependent upon their unique circumstances.
Of course.
Right. So don't expect a pat answer back. And I might send an email back requesting a little bit more information.
Right. Well, of course, if someone's got an 85% PPO patients in their practice and it's making up 90% of the revenues, it's not like, just tell them that you're out tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah. There's a way of doing it.
There's a way to do it. And it depends on your circumstances.
Absolutely. So they have to affect their fees and their revenues and get their fees up. So that's number 2.
Yes.
Okay. So what's number 3?
So number 3 has to do with utilizing what you're already paying for. Right. So there are things that we're putting money into. We're putting money into personnel. We're putting money into making sure that the phone rings, and we get marketing. We're putting money into different things. We're putting money into having a patient sit in front of us that potentially needs treatment and should pay for a treatment plan. So all those things that we're paying for, right? We need to make sure that we're getting what we're paying for there.
That's an interesting take on it.
Yes. Meaning that we don't have money to waste anymore. So while before we could buy too much food and we could throw some of the food in the garbage can afterwards, it's like, no, we paid for a certain amount of food. We need to eat it all. Right? And so that has to do with running a tighter ship, making sure that your skills are better, like your skills to convert treatment plans, and handle patients to get committed to actually getting healthy. The way that your time's being utilized in the practice, your chair time, the way that you're utilizing your staff by training your staff, making sure that you do marketing, that your staff knows how to make that phone call turn into an actual patient in the office. I mean, what's the conversion rate in the United States?
23%.
You know these numbers?
And you talked about this at length as far as if you want a really good little primer on this, if you go to episode 2, you went over, well, not you, obviously you did episode 2, but if you're listening, in episode 2, Sabri went through how to handle phone calls with your receptionist, which I thought was really excellent. So if you have a chance, check it out.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
But I think that the conversion rate is so low, that means 3 out of 4 phone calls are wasted.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. Well, we paid for those phone calls. If you take a look at your sales closing percentage, what you call nicely your treatment acceptance, which really is your sales closing percentage. If it's 50%, that means half the opportunities that you have, half the income in the practice is not being realized.
It's not potential income isn't happening.
Correct. But I'm paying for the staff. I'm paying for the facility. I paid for that patient to sit in front of me and I'm not using it.
Well, I think this is the funny one, right?
Yeah.
Because here's what happens, right? And I've seen this happen. Like clients will come. This is not a shameless plug. This is actually, it'll work as one, but it's actually true. Clients will come to the MGE communication and sales seminars A, B, and C.
Yeah.
The ABC seminars.
Yeah.
And you know this, they start off in the morning. We start off with wins.
Yes.
Right? That was a tradition Dr. Winteregg started years ago.
Yes.
Right? All right. So they'll give their wins, right? I collected an extra $30,000 last month. I did this. And usually first time clients will think like that we paid these people. We seeded the audience and paid these people because the change is so profound.
Yes.
But it's actually 100% true.
Yes.
Right? So it's not unusual for someone to come to one of their first sales and communication seminars and collect an extra $20,000 or $30,000 the next month. But here's the funny thing. They didn't hire a bunch of staff. They didn't do a bunch of marketing, or if they did, it didn't have a chance to become effective yet. All they learned to do was sell better.
That's right.
Communicate more effectively. But that also means something else. That $30,000 that they closed was always there.
Right.
It's always been there. They just finally realized it.
Correct. Well, how many clients do we take? The first thing that we do is we actually build up their recall.
Right.
They have all those patients that are not coming in with outstanding treatment plans, that are not coming in for their hygiene.
Right.
Where we get the opportunity to represent the case.
Yeah.
Right. And they're focusing on new patients. I'm going, yeah, but we already paid. For those other patients, you're letting rot on your shelves.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So start using what you've already paid for. And there's so many different areas. I talked about some of them: recall, personnel, sales opportunities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But we better not.
That's true. It goes from 30 minutes or less to hours and hours and hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen to Jeff and Sabri speak indefinitely.
Exactly. All right. Go ahead.
Anyway, so we can move right along to the fourth point, right?
Yes.
And, some of these things are going to take a little bit of work. And, as I said, the 3 things before we spoke about very quickly, and they may not know how to do all those things, but even doing it a little bit better is going to increase their profit. So just start doing something.
Agreed.
I guess.
Go ahead.
Okay. So then that fourth point is how you are spending the money.
In your business.
Right? So if you need a new piece of equipment, is that really going to make you money? Right? If you are cutting marketing, right, because you're trying to save money, is that going to cost you more money?
Right.
Right. So I guess it boils down to how you spend the money that you have to make more money.
Yeah. I think that process doesn't necessarily get thought through very well.
No.
Because I've seen it where, you have somebody who's buying a CEREC machine, a CEREC, and they're doing 4 crowns a month.
Right.
Their lease payment is higher than their lab bill.
Correct.
It makes no sense.
No.
Right. And then it gets worse. And we've seen this. I've shown this to you before. We'll get the little postcards in our mailbox from local dentists, and it'll have advertised on there, CEREC. They have a CEREC.
That's right.
Like
people don't even know what that is.
They don't know what a CEREC is.
Right.
But you'd be surprised. I was talking to Santone about this the other day, Jeff Santone.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised. Well, you wouldn't be surprised. You've seen it. But how he'll run into somebody he's talking to, like someone who's not a client. And they're thinking, well, I bought this new thing, and this thing, adding these 2 chairs or buying this new piece of equipment, or I bought a laser, or this is going to blow my practice out through the roof. Right.
Well, you just actually said something very interesting.
Huh.
Putting in a new operatory, you have no idea how often I hear that. Mm-hmm. When the doctor's already working 40 hours out of 2 operatories, mm-hmm. right? Meaning he personally has 2 and then the other 2 are hygienists. Like, how is an extra operatory going to help you?
You can work 60 hours then, because it's 20 hours and up.
Right. But even then, you can't be in 3 places at the same time.
That's true.
Right. So I don't really always see the think through. So how about, how much do you refer out? Mm-hmm. Right.
That's a good point.
Maybe you can bring that in-house. And if you don't want a specialist to do it and you want to do it yourself, take an implant course, put your money in that.
Right.
If you're so inclined clinically.
Right.
If you, personnel, mm-hmm. I'd be very hesitant before I start firing staff, because well-used personnel are worth their weight in gold.
Especially productive personnel.
Yeah. They're the ones who get your patients in. They're the ones who help you sell the treatment plans and do your marketing and make sure your recall is full and make sure patients show up. And, a good personnel will make you money.
Right.
Right. So you don't go dismissing personnel to save, unless obviously that person's not productive.
Right.
But then conversely, if you're paying for somebody that's not productive and you've done what you're supposed to do to get them productive, why are you holding on to them?
Yeah, good point. That's a whole other discussion, I think.
Marketing, I often see cut, mm-hmm. right? Like I only have, this very little percentage of my overhead for marketing when they're dying for new patients. That's not a smart move. Yeah. So put your money into things that are going to make you more money.
Yeah, good point. And think it through, I guess, is the key too, because like you come to buy, obviously, if you need something for patient quality of care, mm-hmm. you're going to need that. Or to operate, you're going to need that.
Obviously.
But, I've seen it with like cone beams.
Mm-hmm.
So someone wants to get a cone beam, but I would really analyze, like, how is this going to impact my practice? What are you going to charge for an x-ray? Mm-hmm. How many are you referring out if you can't currently do them?
Correct.
Right. And really examine how much is it going to cost you to lease a machine?
Right.
Right. I'm not saying don't get one.
No.
And a lot of doctors absolutely need one.
Yes.
And it's convenient.
Yes.
But the idea of convenience doesn't outweigh reality.
Right.
If you go, I'm going to start getting all these implant patients. Well, would it be so bad to start getting them first and then get the cone beam?
Right. And you just said it. There's a sequence to all of this.
Yeah.
So if you're super excited about getting a cone beam, then give yourself a game, but your overhead doesn't allow for you to get a cone beam easily right now. Mm-hmm. Then give yourself a game where you take care of some of these other issues that sequentially you should be doing first if you're a responsible business owner.
Right.
Right. And then the reward at the end of it is the cone beam. And it doesn't have to take a year. That could take 3 months.
Or less if you
want. Or less. It doesn't take that long to get out of PPOs. It doesn't take that long to train your staff properly.
That's true.
Right.
Absolutely true. Yeah, I think that the idea is anything you're spending in your business should be doing something to mm-hmm. either sustain the business or make the business more productive.
Correct.
Whether it's paying for personnel, for employee, whether it's marketing. Mm-hmm. And again, if your marketing is not working, mm-hmm. quote unquote, mm-hmm. Okay, well, why? Is mm-hmm. the marketing not getting responses? Is it that your staff aren't handling the inquiries well? I mean, why is it not making money? Or even worse, this is one thing people don't often think with marketing.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the way we evaluate marketing is I'm going to do marketing and I'm going to look at, how many responses did I get?
Yeah.
B, did we convert those responses into something?
Correct.
And C, were they upsold from there?
Yes.
Okay. Like for a dentist, you're
Yeah.
going to look at, okay, they sent out a postcard to come in for a discounted cleaning. Okay. The patient called in. How many of those got scheduled? Okay.
Right.
So 100 calls came in and they scheduled 80. That's really good.
Yes.
Okay. Well, those patients came in the practice
Mhm.
and you did new patient initial exams on these patients
Mhm.
and they needed X amount of treatment. How many of those actually went ahead with their treatment?
Correct.
So your marketing could work great at the first two parts, a lot of calls, good conversion rate at reception, but then if you can't sell, the marketing effort is torpedoed right there.
Yeah, and not just that, you actually end up costing the business money because you used your hygiene time for a discounted cleaning and
There
it
you
will
go.
actually crash your production.
Right. So, but if I use them for a discounted cleaning and they need $5,000-$6,000 worth of treatment
Mhm.
and I close it,
Mhm.
well, this was great.
Right.
It's worked out for everybody.
Right. So they got to solve the right problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
And that's where, it's kind of why companies like us exist, right?
Yes.
In a way,
No, it does. It does because we teach them the business end of things. I mean, I can't do dentistry.
Right.
Right. But I didn't go open a dental practice, but they did open a business. So they should learn a little bit
I agree.
about business.
I agree.
Right.
Well, okay, good. I definitely think that was well over 30 minutes, but so in
Was
an
it?
hour or less. We did it under an hour. That was really
That's pretty
good.
good for us.
Yeah. Any last things you want to add before we wrap it up?
No.
No.
I guess the only thing I would say is we're coming into a new era of dentistry now,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the post-COVID period,
Right.
where they're really going to have to be a little bit more paying attention to being a business owner.
No, I agree.
That's
I agree.
all.
I mean, if I were to just as a statement, we just did an article on this. We're doing a presentation on it soon. Is that dentistry, especially private dentistry in the 2020s going forward,
Yeah.
is going to be for the average person operating like the average person is now. A lot of PPOs,
Yeah.
small margins is going to be rough.
That's right.
Like there are a few things you need to start doing right now
Mhm.
so that you make it through the 2020s, not just intact, but thriving.
Right. And you can, absolutely. People
agree.
will pay for good dentistry because it's important to them.
Agreed. 100%.
Yeah,
Well, Sabri, thank you so much for joining me.
absolutely.
Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And folks, that about is all of it for this week. So have a great week. And if you have a chance, don't forget, take a minute and follow the podcast or subscribe it, depending on where you're listening to it. If you have questions about MGE, you can find us at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. I have the links on the webpage for the overhead sheet we spoke about, as well as Sabri's email address. So if you want to email Sabri, you can. Otherwise, we will see you guys at the next episode.